It's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories this morning. 2 arrests have been made, a man and a woman, following the fatal shooting of 26-year-old Ellie Edwards in Merseyside on Christmas Eve.
I'm here in the Wirral, where despite the arrests, police have renewed their appeal for information following the shootings.
Spending at the sales as people head out looking for bargains.
I'm here on Oxford Street, where the number of shoppers has been booming for Boxing Day, but not quite pre-pandemic levels.
At least 59 people are now known to have died in the winter storms spreading across the US and Canada. China eases more COVID measures. No more quarantine for foreign travellers arriving from next month. China and concerns that the cost of living crisis is stopping children going to the theatre or panto. In sport, Arsenal come back against West Ham to win and go 7 points clear at the top of the Premier League. And at 7:45, we'll take a look at this morning's papers again with writer and academic Mo Lovett and broadcaster Pete Price. A very good morning. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Now, police on Merseyside have arrested a 30-year-old man on suspicion of the murder of Ellie Edwards. Ellie, who was 26 years old, was shot dead while enjoying a drink with her sister and friends on Christmas Eve. A 28-year-old man injured in the incident remains in a critical condition. A 19-year-old woman has also been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Sky's Inzamam Rashid has the latest developments from Wallasey.
Ellie Edwards was doing nothing but enjoying herself on a night out. She was with her sister as they celebrated, bringing in Christmas together. But it was her who was caught in a line of reckless gunfire and murdered.
She's just a gorgeous soul, isn't she?
Yeah. With her that night were Jess and Meg. Like so many friends for a girl much loved, the loss is immense.
We went to go and get a drink, went to the bar, and then we just heard bangs, and people.
We thought it was fireworks.
Automatically, everyone just stopped, and we were like, something's not right.
When they returned, Ellie had been shot in the head, and panic ensued.
She was going home to go to sleep and wake up on Christmas with her family.
It could have been anyone that night.
It could have been anyone, and we're very lucky, but it shouldn't have been Ella either.
It was only 10 minutes before Christmas Day when the attack took place. In this CCTV we've obtained, at least 12 gunshots can be heard. Just moments later, those who were celebrating on Christmas Eve are seen leaving, shocked, confused and distraught. And within minutes of receiving a call, emergency services arrived. But by then, police believe the gunman driving a dark Mercedes had fled. On Monday evening, a flurry of police action led to 2 arrests. First, a 30-year-old man on suspicion of murder and attempted murder, and a 19-year-old woman in custody on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. The police are clear they will not rest until they find those responsible for Ellie's murder and the injuries sustained by 4 others. As they question suspects in custody, there will be a sense of relief for many who are adamant this kind of violence is unusual for this area.
It hasn't ever really manifested itself across the river on the Wirral in the way that we've seen these kinds of heartless attacks and behaviour of serious organised crime going on over the other side of the river. And so I think that is also a very worrying development.
At the scene, Ellie's family, including her dad, came to lay flowers for a person they so deeply loved. The last few days were supposed to be some of the happiest. Instead, they've undoubtedly been the worst. This was a woman snatched in the prime of her life. Ellie Edwards wasn't the intended target. she was an innocent victim caught up in this brutal incident. Inzamam Rashid, Sky News, The Wirral.
Well, joining us now from Wallasey on the Wirral is Sky's Becky Cottrell. A very good morning to you, Becky. Certainly a significant development overnight with these arrests, but many questions remain and police continue to appeal for information.
Yes, certainly questions remain. And yes, these arrests will be a relief for the moment for Ellie Edwards' family and for this community. But as we've said, the police do not believe she was the intended target of the attack. So how did she come to be caught up in this, that shooting on Christmas Eve at this pub just behind me? Police, despite the fact they are now questioning those two suspects, are still appealing for information. They are particularly keen to obtain any mobile phone or CCTV or dash cam footage from that evening. They have said that they believe the gunman fired into the front entrance of the pub, and then a short time after, a dark vehicle, possibly an A-Class Mercedes, was seen leaving the pub car park. So they are still keen to work out the timeline of that evening that surrounded, obviously, this awful shooting. As you heard in Inzi's report then, we have spoken to two friends of Eddie's who were out with her that evening. They said they thought the gunshots initially were fireworks, and they spoke of their guilt almost that they're still alive, their relief, but also their guilt that they were able to celebrate Christmas with their families, and Ellie Edwards, of course, was not. They said that that evening her sister had been out and that the two of them were particularly close, and in a tribute to her sister, she said, this is Lucy, Ellie's sister, she said that Ellie was her bestest friend and like a second mummy to her. And we saw her and the rest of Ellie's family gather here yesterday to lay flowers in tribute to Ellie Edwards. There were lots of colourful bouquets with cards with personal messages to Ellie and about Ellie, and photos of Ellie. And it was, as you can imagine, an incredibly sombre moment. Her father in particular looked, as you would expect, very emotional. And this is a time when normally her family would be coming together to celebrate Christmas and the holidays, and they are instead having to deal with this huge, horrendous blow and the loss of Ellie Edwards' life.
OK, Becky, for now, thank you. Becky Cottrell across those developments for us in Merseyside. We'll bring you more on that throughout the programme. Now, shoppers across the UK have defied Boxing Day predictions as footfall bounced back from 2021. In contrast to what many were expecting, the number of Boxing Day shoppers across the UK increased by 50% compared to last year. Despite rail strikes, footfall in central London was up sharply by 139% compared to last year. But the number still fell short of pre-pandemic levels. Across the UK, they were down by almost a third compared to 2019. Well, Sky's Sabah Chowdhury joins us now from Oxford Street in central London. A very good morning to you, Sabah. Certainly a little surprised that footfall is up on last year, but still nowhere near the level it normally is.
Good morning. Absolutely. Retailers were preparing for a quiet Boxing Day. Some major stores even starting their sales a week before, going up to 80%. That doesn't usually happen, and that is, of course, because of concerns around the cost of living crisis and the rail strikes. They genuinely thought that less people would be coming out to shop. So I think it's safe to say that they were pleasantly surprised when they received the data from the analysts' Springboard. Now, Springboard measure the footfall, which is essentially the number of people that come to a shop or to a shopping centre during a particular juncture. And the data now that we have is up to midday yesterday. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The number of people going shopping compared to last year has more than doubled. And we're talking over 50%. Now, that is significant considering the economic hardships this country has been facing in recent months, or even recent years, I should say, with the pandemic. So it was a welcome news to many of the retailers, many on this high street. So encouraging data because it shows people are spending. However, it must be said that this data, while it is high compared to last year, when we compare it to pre-pandemic levels, it's still under by around 30%. So an important caveat there, and also the fact that this data does not include online spending as well. Now, in the next few hours, we will have for you even more up-to-date data, which will show us what spending was like across the day during the Boxing Day sales.
Thank you. Let's have a look at some of the other news this morning. And opposition to new housing developments could be reduced if there was a greater focus on design and the heart and soul of places. That's according to the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove. He's hit out at what he's called indifferent or insipid planning, saying some good housing developments are let down by poor landscaping. The boss of HS2 has hailed the project's immense progress in 2022. Chief Executive Mark Thurston said a series of milestones were reached over the past 12 months. However, it's feared stage one of Europe's biggest infrastructure project could go way over its £40 billion budget. At least 59 people are now known to have died across North America as the US and Canada continue to be battered by ferocious winter storms. Some were found dead in their cars in snowdrifts. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda sent us this report from New York City.
Well, the city of Buffalo buried and unrecognizable as the death toll from the devastating deluge of heavy winds and heavy snow continues to rise. Officials reporting 27 deaths so far in Erie County, New York alone. Some victims found in snowbanks and cars after this blistering blizzard brought even first responders' efforts at some points to a complete standstill. Victims apparently dying from exposure, according to officials. Others lack of heat and cardiac events after shoveling snow. Officials say between today and tomorrow, parts of Buffalo could see up to another foot of snow, hampering ongoing urgent search and rescue missions happening on the ground in the region there. 400 National Guardsmen on the ground. Fortunately, we're hearing that conditions should improve in the coming days with warming temperatures on the way, but the sweeping storm's timing, it certainly brought a lot to a standstill, and we continue to see the lingering impacts on travel. More than 14,000 flight cancellations since Friday. Southwest Airlines nixing more than 60% of its flights. The airline apologizing to customers in a statement, calling its challenges unacceptable and promising to urgently reposition crews. Keep in mind, flight disruptions to this degree can take days to work out.
Emily Ikeda there in New York for us with that update. Meanwhile, here, the Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning for the north of England and across Scotland too. Travel disruption is expected, and Traffic Scotland is urging people to plan ahead before travelling, with ice and snow already on several of the major roads. To China now, where they've announced it will drop a COVID-19 quarantine requirement for passengers arriving from overseas. In the latest easing of the country's strict measures to control the spread of the virus, Sky's Helen Smith has the latest from Beijing.
This latest news today that these final few restrictions that existed are being dropped is really a strong indication that there is now no going back for China. Zero COVID absolutely feels like it is a thing of the past. It would simply be too late now to try and rein in the virus that is spreading, frankly, like wildfire through this country. So those some of the last remaining restrictions that are being dropped, international travellers coming into the country will no longer have to be quarantined in hotels at various times during this epidemic. That quarantine has been as long as 3 weeks. Currently, it's 5 days in a hotel plus 3 days at home. That will no longer be necessary. The disease and the handling of it is also going to be downgraded. And it had been graded as a Category A handling. We're saying the disease itself had been Category B, but the handling of it was Category A, which essentially gave the government the power to quarantine people in their homes and whatnot. That is being downgraded, essentially meaning that responsibility for handling the disease prevention and response is now back in the hands of the doctors rather than the government. And finally, testing will no longer be mandatory. So up until now, people have had to get a test in this country almost every couple of days, for a year or so. So it is really, really dramatic changes. Remember, it is actually fewer than 3 weeks ago that the government undertook this dramatic U-turn away from zero COVID. And I can't overemphasize enough just how how dominating zero COVID was in the lives of people here. You had to get tested all the time. You couldn't enter any public place or building or park without a code on your phone showing that you were negative. If you were infected, you would be taken away to a quarantine facility. At a moment's notice, you could be locked down in your home. Whole cities of millions of people would be locked down entirely over a handful of cases. And it's gone from all of that really to almost nothing in the space of about 3 weeks. The net result, sadly, is that there are many, many infections and probably many deaths. We really just don't know how many because the numbers simply aren't being reported. There was only one death reported in Beijing yesterday, for example, but anecdotally, many hundreds, possibly many of thousands of people are dying because this is an enormous population with relatively low levels of immunity because that virus hadn't been spreading. And actually, although vaccination amongst young people is not too bad, full vaccination, including boosters amongst the elderly, is actually reasonably low. So there is anecdotal evidence that hospitals like the one behind me and others and crematoriums, some are becoming overwhelmed. But just the degree to which that's happening is very, very difficult to ascertain. But truly a dramatic turnaround in this flagship policy within China.
Helen Ann Smith with the latest there from China. Now, train services will continue to be disrupted today with the latest 48-hour strike by the RMT union finishing at just 6 o'clock this morning. Another union, the TSSA, has now begun a 24-hour strike hitting cross-country trains. Network Rail are warning passengers to prepare for significant disruption into the new year, with national strikes planned on the 3rd and 4th and the 6th and 7th of January. Well, joining me now is the travel editor for The Independent, Simon Calder, who's at Paddington Station. Hello to you, Simon. Thanks for joining us. Merry Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas to you, but sadly not for rail passengers. The first trains out of here won't be going for another couple of hours, I'm sorry to say.
OK, that's interesting to know because, of course, this latest strike ended around an hour and a quarter ago. Just how much disruption did it cause to Christmas travel and how long is it going to take for normal services to resume?
Really good questions. When the RMT called this strike, it was a kind of bonus strike. This one was aimed squarely at Network Rail, and the union said, we just want to disrupt the £120 million worth of engineering works taking place over Christmas Day and Boxing Day. So it started at 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve, as you say, finished an hour and 20 minutes or so ago. But it actually had a much more dramatic effect, which is why you had extraordinary things on Christmas Eve, people having to leave pantomimes halfway through to catch the last trains. Pretty much everything had finished by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, reached its destination. Total shutdown. And I was looking forward to the first train being in at 7:53 this morning from Sheffield to Plymouth. That's now been cancelled. So if you're watching in Edinburgh, you can be the first passengers to travel by train since Christmas. The 7:59 from there to Glasgow Queen Street. 1 minute later, there's a train from Glasgow Queen Street back to Edinburgh Waverley. And then 1 minute past 8, first Eurostar train from London to Paris. That was the entire service yesterday. 43 international trains wiped out as a result of this strike. And then, well, Manchester Airport gets its first service departing Manchester Piccadilly at 8:05, but that's a bus replacement service because, of course, we're now well into the festive engineering works. So a miserable time for travellers. And as you say, Network Rail at Euston Station are saying to anybody who's involved in the West Coast Main Line, don't even think about travelling unless you absolutely have to until the 9th of January.
Now, Simon, there's always a bit of travel chaos at this time of year. How much worse has it been with the strike action that we've seen on the railways, also border force at airports as well, impacting arriving passengers at passport control? What has the impact of that been on other forms of travel like air and road?
Well, in terms of aviation, we were all there. Sky News was there on Friday morning, 23rd of December, busiest day at many of the nation's airports this winter, expecting to see, because we've been warned of some significant disruption, both by the government and by airlines, and there wasn't any. Basically, every airport, and that was Heathrow, Gatwick, Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow and Cardiff, they all coped absolutely fine. There's not a strike today. They resume tomorrow, members of the PCS union working for UK Border Force in a dispute over pay. But even when that does come back, I think that we're not going to see any significant disruption there. The big problem is across the Atlantic, of course, as you've been reporting, extreme weather in the northeastern United States and in Canada. We're seeing quite a lot of delays coming in. And I'll tell you what, anybody, if I had a connecting flight from the UK to somewhere in that region with an onward flight, I would be thinking very carefully about that, because we are seeing cancellations by the thousands of flights within the US, and in particular Southwest Airlines has cancelled more than half of its schedule. It's an absolute mess there.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are, of course, expecting even more snowfall, Simon. Now, looking ahead into the new year, these rail strikes are going to continue. What inside knowledge do you have, if any, about how these talks are going? Are we any closer to a resolution?
There are no talks. That was the slightly plaintive message on Friday from the RMT union. They put out something saying ministers have gone missing. We want to talk. And certainly when I talk to individual railway men and women, they have lost hundreds of pounds, sometimes thousands of pounds in the so far 16 days of strikes that the RMT has called nationally. By the way, we've got another ASLEF train drivers strike sort of slotted in on the 5th of January to make the first week back at the return to work pretty impossible for everyone. So I sense that we will be moving towards a conclusion probably round about the second week. Once the next set of strikes is finished, we should get talks resuming. But frankly, every single day that this goes on, it cheeses off the passengers, many of whom are now going to be looking for other options to travel, and it especially cheeses off the taxpayer, many of whom never go near a train and yet are being told, yes, you've got to pump yet more billions into the railway, even though this very railway is telling people not to try to travel because things are in such a mess. It's desperate state of affairs, and we haven't really seen anything this bad for a generation, I'm afraid.
Yeah, certainly it has felt like an extraordinary Christmas period for travel. Simon, we appreciate your thoughts. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
A very good morning. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories. 2 arrests have been made, a man and a woman, following the fatal shooting of 26-year-old Ellie Edwards in Merseyside on Christmas Eve. At least 59 people are now known to have died in the winter storm spreading across the US and Canada. China is to ease more COVID measures. There'll be no more quarantine for foreign travellers arriving from next month. Now, last week, Sky News spoke with Carol Morrison, a woman who was sheltering in a warm bank because she couldn't afford her heating. Now, after seeing our report, 10-year-old Nathan Calagbor from Ireland offered to donate his pocket money to Carol. He'd been having a sleepless night worrying about her well-being. Well, Sky's Aisha Zahid has brought Carol and Nathan together to hear their stories.
For Carol, keeping her home warm this winter has been difficult. She's had to rely on a warm bank at her local community library. That's where we first met.
And when I'm here, it's like everything disappears. I don't have to worry about anything. I've got until 5, I'm here, it's lovely. And then when I go home, I know it's bedtime. Because then I have to take my medication at night. And then I go to bed. Because what else is there? It's going to be freezing cold.
Miles away in Ireland, 10-year-old Nathan had been watching our report with his mother, Lovinder. He was moved to tears and eager to help.
So Nathan, are you excited about meeting Carol?
Oh, I'm very, very excited. I'm overjoyed.
And now the Calagbors and Carol finally catch up.
Hi, Carol. Hi. How are you?
I'm good, actually. I'm much better today. Yes, so tell me how you were worried for me.
What had happened was Ireland just had this whole 1 week of ice. And it was like biting cold. And he was sick. So he had just gone through the whole dose of steroids and all that because of the cold. So what just came to his mind was like, what could happen to this lady?
I was worried for you because I saw you that in the cold, if you were like that, I don't know what could have happened. So I really wanted to donate to help you to get out of the cold and also to be able to have a warm house.
I don't really want to take your savings. Yeah, I don't think that would sit comfortably with me. But I really am appreciative of your kind thoughts for me. I think you've helped me emotionally, that you've really touched my heart. You really have. You've touched my heart. I couldn't be more happier now. I feel as though I've got an adopted son.
We should definitely keep in touch.
Yes, no problem, no problem. Give me a smile. Give me a smile, Nath. That's better. You look pretty when you have a smile. Yeah, a smile is a very good thing to have. And don't lose it, okay? And don't worry about me. Don't worry about me, I'll be okay.
They may be generations apart, but one thing's for certain. Nathan's kind gesture has left more of an impact than he could have ever imagined. Aisha Zahid, Sky News.
What a thoughtful little boy. That's certainly my favourite story of the morning. Now, have town planners got it all wrong? According to a report today, good housing plans can be ruined because they don't fit in with the local landscape. And that is why lots of people simply don't like them. A new report by Policy Exchange today suggests that many of the plans are mediocre. Well, joining me now is Ike EJ, Head of Housing Architecture and Urban Space in Policy Exchange. A very good morning to you, Ike. Forgive me, I think I mispronounced your name there. Merry Christmas. Thanks for joining us.
Merry Christmas. Morning, no problem. Merry Christmas.
Now, tell us what you've learned carrying out this research. What are you proposing is needed when it comes to town planning, and what changes could make the biggest differences?
Well, essentially, we're proposing a new school of place, a national school of place that will be responsible for dispensing the very best standards of architecture, town planning, design to a new generation of built environment professionals to enable them to go out and basically create better, more beautiful and more sustainable places. And obviously, we have existing architecture schools and planning schools, but our idea is to really re-galvanize the idea of beauty, sustainability, making sure that we get places right, which presents a whole world of a whole host of kind of urban benefits, but chiefly within a political context, we genuinely believe it may also help solve the housing crisis.
Truth is, though, we're all NIMBYs at heart, aren't we? No one wants new construction and building work going on in their backyard. How do you get around this?
Well, basically, look, NIMBYism can be profoundly annoying. Nobody denies that. But anybody who believes in living in a democracy and free will has to go along with the fact that NIMBYs have to exist. So our solution, as represented in the report, to NIMBYism is not to demonize NIMBYs, but is to basically remove some of the elements that make them NIMBYs in the first place. And one of those elements, it's not the only element, and it won't get rid of NIMBYism overnight, but one of those elements is poor design, a fear of poor design, a fear that their communities, homes and neighborhoods will be blighted by other developments that simply aren't good enough quality. So if we can make sure that the quality increases, then that will eventually, hopefully, help increase public confidence in the quality of new design, which will be one of the ways in which NIMBYism can be addressed.
Now, Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Michael Gove, is backing your plan. What difference could planning make in terms of improving equality?
Well, essentially, the planning system is the custodian of our built environment. Everything has to go through the planning system. You have to get planning permission in order to build. It's basically that simple. So, there are many structural flaws within the planning system. We're not saying a new school of place will solve all of them, but it will hopefully enable the planning system to be able to more readily identify what is good and what is positive, and also help pursue it as well. And this we hope eventually will have this trickle-down effect of essentially making the places we all live better. And as we say, our kind of long-term plan for that, it won't happen overnight, is by that increasing public confidence in the quality of housing and design that can help reduce the opposition new housing often gets, which will enable more housing to be built, which could enable the housing crisis to be resolved.
OK, so paint the picture for us, if you can, Ike. What changes are you proposing that would create these new urban areas? And what does that perfect housing estate look like?
Well, that's a good question. In terms of a perfect housing estate, what we would say, I mean, perfection's obviously, wouldn't necessarily say anything is perfect, but in terms of a good quality housing development, we would say it would need to do certain things. There would need to be character. It would need to have urban character. It would need to have a sense of place. You'd have to go there and feel uplifted and not necessarily feel depressed or marginalized in the way that some housing developments can sometimes be. It would also, one we envisage, which would have been delivered through public consultation. Now, public consultation exists, but it exists in a way in which many people often feel kind of forced out of the process and they don't have their voices heard. This new school, as well as promoting quality in design, it will also promote the idea of rigorously, we're not saying urban development should be done by a kind of a beauty parade or public consent, but just making sure the public are more involved. So basically the idea of beauty, the idea of higher quality, and the idea of a greater influence for provable popularity, public consultation, democratizing the process, making people feel more enfranchised and involved. These are the things which we eventually hope will percolate into the system from a national school of place in order to make the housing market better and more representative of what people may want as well.
OK, fascinating stuff. Ike, EJ, great talking to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Time now for a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
After Boxing Day's cold and showery theme, the rest of the week looks milder with spells of wind and rain. It's a wet and windy start in the west with snow for Britain's northern hills, but eastern parts are mainly fine. There will be icy stretches in places as well. Rain will move across more of Britain during the morning, but central and southeast England will stay largely fine. There will be further snow on northern hills, especially north of the central belt of Scotland, where disruption is possible too, so take care on the roads. We'll have more on that throughout the programme.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Still to come this morning, we'll be taking a look through this morning's papers with writer and academic Mo Lovett and broadcaster Pete Price. That's coming up.
Sky News Snow Report, sponsored by snowrental.co.uk. Online ski hire in Europe.
The recent rain and mild conditions across the Alps have seen many valleys turning green again, I'm afraid. It'll become colder this week, but there will be very little snow in the forecast. For those venturing off-piste in Western Austria, there is still a precarious avalanche situation in places. France has some of the best conditions at the moment, with the majority of ski lifts running there. Meanwhile, artificial snow is still covering some of the slopes in Italy, I'm afraid. And finally, Switzerland has good snow altitude, with nearly 2 metres being reported at Saas-Fee.
Sky News Snow Report, sponsored by snowrental.co.uk. Online ski hire in Europe.
Now, with us this morning to review the papers are writer and academic Mo Lovett and broadcaster Pete Price. Hi to you both again. I think we're kicking off with you, Mo, aren't we? You've pulled out this story from the Daily Mail, an interview that Theresa May gave to Radio 4. It was a fascinating interview yesterday, actually. I don't know if you heard it. But certainly she's confident that Rishi Sunak may be able to close this enormous poll gap with Labour.
Yeah, well, I thought we hadn't had very much party politics this morning, so we'd focus in on this interview that, as you say, Theresa May gave yesterday. She claims that Rishi Sunak is rebuilding trust and that there is time for the Tories to turn it around and win the next general election. Now, this is against the backdrop of polls suggesting that the Labour Party have a 20-point lead at the moment and have had a fairly substantial lead for the last 6 months, as far as I can remember. Sir John Curtis, our election guru that we all know and love, has said Tory support has really plummeted in the wake of kind of unforced errors and also the economic backdrop that we've been talking about all morning. So I think it's an interesting one. I mean, the thing, obviously, it's about rallying the troops, isn't it? And I think the one thing I always think about elections is that you should never, ever take the electorate for granted. No matter what the polls say, people will make their mind up on the day, and they should never be taken for granted. But what I would hate is for the parties to either kind of admit defeat or to kind of be complacent about a win, and for people not to listen to the electorate. I mean, that's one of the things that I think we've had sort of quite a slovenly political class of late that aren't really kind of tackling some of the problems we face in society. So although this might be about rallying the troops, I do think it's good not to be complacent about what the outcome of the next general election might be. I loved in this little piece in the Mail, the very last paragraph, it says, Nadine Dorries has suggested if the Tory numbers keep slipping, Boris Johnson will be back in number 10. Now, that just made me smile. I'll let viewers make of it what they think, but I thought that was quite a funny little final paragraph.
Gosh, more likely to be back in number 10 or in the jungle, who knows, right? Pete, you pulled out this story on the front page of The Guardian, which frankly I found quite shocking when I was reading it this morning, that student homelessness is rising. It says here that not since the 1970s have they seen anything like this, when students were sleeping in sports halls and cars. This is all very depressing, isn't it?
It is depressing, but I'm really surprised at the story. It says that the purpose-built student accommodation is not expanding the way it was. Now, if they came to Liverpool, you've never seen so much accommodation in your life. I have never seen high-rise blocks being put up so fast, and it's all a student accommodation. We're a big student city anyway, so I think that's really exciting. But on the private sector, the landlords are changing their mind and not using students like they used to. Also, the rules and regulations are making it more difficult. But there's a bigger problem for these people, these lovely students who are bringing so much money into our cities, is they're getting substantial bills for their electricity on top of their rents, and they are struggling to keep warm and they've got to be warm when they're doing their work, but they're having big problems. But I'm surprised that they're saying that this problem is the biggest problem since 1970. It doesn't make sense to me, because Liverpool is absolutely packed with a student accommodation.
It's really interesting, isn't it? But it's whether they can afford it, I suppose, isn't it?
Oh, no, they can't afford it. That's a sad thing. But you see, a couple of my friends, I'm going to get castigated for this, a couple of my friends' kids are students, but they've got part-time jobs as well because they want to make it work.
Yeah, well, certainly, I always had a job when I was at university, and it's something that a lot of students do have to do, isn't it? Mo, to this story that you've pulled out from The Times today, saying that stay-at-home fathers are up 34% since the pandemic. 1 in 9 full-time parents are now men. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is interesting. I think it's one of those things that, pandemics change societies, don't they? They change attitudes. And this is one of those stories, or at least accelerate underlying trends in society. So, as you say, 1 in 9 full-time parents now, so that's parents who don't work but are full-time parents, are fathers now. And that's kind of compared to 1 in 14 back in 2019, whereas mothers, full-time mums who don't work, and that's fallen from 1.3 million to 1.2 million in the same period. I mean, the numbers are sort of 140,000 compared to 1.2 million. So you can see that, stay-at-home parenting is still the majority, women doing that. I mean, the report, it says, itself says that this is, this is due to, it's a good thing for equity and pay, because it means that women are able to go out and earn more. I think it's interesting because one thing the report doesn't talk about is what type of work and the changes of work. I mean, we knew in the pandemic that, it was mostly the middle class that could stay at home with a computer-based job, whereas manual workers had to go out and be in society. So that's a different kind of quality of work, whether you're out and using manual labour and you're behind a computer. So it doesn't really cut across whether or not it has affected pay and conditions for women in the workplace. But I just think it's a very interesting kind of sign of the times in the way attitudes are changing. I mean, there's one father who said if he hadn't worked from home during the pandemic, if he'd been in the office, it may never have occurred to him that he could be a stay-at-home father, and then he's taken that decision. So yeah, as you say, quite interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Certainly a lot of fathers who used to travel a lot for work really enjoyed that time at home, seeing their children grow up during the pandemic. Certainly it was eye-opening for a lot of people, wasn't it? Now, this story that you pulled out from the Eye, Pete, COVID restrictions coming back to care homes. This is all quite sad, isn't it?
It is absolutely incensed me, this story. It's not just COVID, it's the flu, it's vomiting bugs. They're talking about shutting down for visitors. When we had the pandemic, care homes were shut down, people died. They were prisoners in those. I understand that the care homes had to help them, but they were prisoners. To do it again, these people are in their last part of their life. They need some sort of relationship, some sort of contact with people they love. And the idea that care homes could close down again through the winter, I understand the problems they've got, but they've got to work harder to keep these problems at bay, because these people are prisoners in their homes and they're dying. And it was dreadful in the pandemic. So many people didn't say goodbye to their loved ones. This is an awful story and it's got to be addressed.
Yeah, certainly not good news for so many families. A quick thought from you, Mo, before we go. The sun, snow go for UK. It was a white Christmas official.
Officially, we had a white Christmas, and it used to be the case that if a snowflake fell on the Met Office in London on Christmas Day, it would be a white crisp. But now, in an era of dumbing down, it can be anywhere in the UK, and it can be any time within the 24 hours of Christmas Day. So yes, although it was too warm in England and Wales, there were parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland where snow fell.
Pete, we'll see you again the next hour. Thank you so much. And we'll have more on all our top stories at the top of the hour. Stay with us.